to talk about food allergy anxiety with a special focus on the child. We're trying something new today. Dr. Gia is going to use her webcam once she begins her presentation, so I request your patience in case we run into some initial technical difficulties. We're hoping it's going to be smooth, but just in case not, you'll know what's going on. This webinar is offered by Kids with Food Allergies as part of its Education Outreach Program. I'm Linda Mitchell, Senior Vice President at the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, or AFA. Kids with Food Allergies is a division of AFA, and I have the privilege of being your moderator this afternoon. Guest presenters for all of our webinars are doing so as volunteers without compensation. They also prepare their presentations based on the clinical evidence. On behalf of AFA and KFA, I'm very grateful for Dr. Rosenblum to donate her time to be here with us today to discuss the topic of child anxiety. Many of us here today deal with daily anxiety related to food allergy for ourselves or for our children, and it's good for us to learn tools to better understand and help ourselves or our children, so I thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I have a few housekeeping details to run through before we get started. First of all, today's webinar is made possible through a sponsorship from Mylan Specialty. We rely on donors and corporate partners like Mylan for the financial support that enables us to develop education programs for families. Next, please remember that this webinar is of a general nature only and is not medical advice or legal advice. You should consult your own physician for any medical advice you seek with regard to food allergies or any other medical conditions. Today's webinar is being recorded, and later in today's webinar we will stop to give away some wonderful gifts from our corporate supporters, Sun Butter and Dr. Lucy, each valued at $20. The recipients of these gifts will be picked randomly from those still in attendance later in the webinar. And when we end the webinar, you will see a survey, and we'd like for you to share your impressions with us, as we will take your feedback very seriously to help improve the future direction of our webinar series. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Gianine Rosenblum, so we can get started. Dr. Gianine Rosenblum is a psychologist in New Jersey in private practice. For 20 years, she has helped individuals and their families cope with complex medical issues, genetic disorders, trauma, and life-threatening food allergies. And as the mother of a child with food allergies herself, she understands the daily anxiety and stress that some families experience. For 10 years, she was a researcher at the Institute for the Study of Child Development at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. Her PhD in psychology is from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. So thank you for joining us today. Dr. Rosenblum, let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate the introduction and for the invitation to speak to the audience today. I'm delighted that I believe there are over 500 people registered for this webinar who are either watching it live with us now or are going to be watching it later. And that's an indication to me of the importance of this topic, that it really did strike a chord to many people that anxiety is something that we live with when we live with families with food allergies. So let me go over the poll results from the current viewers. So to the question, do you or your child have anxiety related to food allergies, 46% indicated that their child is experiencing allergy, 33% indicated that both themselves and their child is experiencing anxiety, and 13% are talking about themselves as being the person with the anxiety. So looking at that, it's certainly an indication that both parents and children experience some stress, anxiety, and worry. Ages of the children we're talking about in this particular group of folks joining us today: young children 3 to 7, 46%, children 7 to 11 years old, 40%. So we're looking at young children and elementary up into perhaps lower middle school ages, 11 to 14 years old. The people are responding, about 8% have kids of that age group, and then 2 and 4% looking at 14 to 17-year-olds and 18 or older. And so the next poll question was, how does your child typically show that he or she is anxious? The majority of you, or almost even numbers, talked about just verbalizing that he or she is worried or fearful. That's 38%. 36% are talking about declining or refusing even safe food, and that's a really common response. 15% are describing their child as tearful. About 9% are talking about avoidance of activities or outing, and 2% are describing school refusal, and we're going to touch on a lot of those things today. So moving on to my first slide, which was primarily just describing what Linda already told you about me, my history as a clinical psychologist and a researcher in child development. In my clinical practice currently, I do work with families of children with food allergies as well as some teenagers and college students who've come to me specifically because the anxiety that they're experiencing, the stress around managing food allergies has become really too much of a challenge for them to meet on their own. And as Linda mentioned, I'm the mom of a 14-year-old daughter with multiple food allergies, currently peanut, tree nut, sunflower, sesame, chickpea, and those are the ones that we're avoiding. My daughter had many more allergies when she was younger. I'm very grateful that she's been able to outgrow some of them. But I want those of you listening to understand that I walk the walk. I really understand what it's like to manage and negotiate all kinds of life experiences while keeping in mind the safety of your child with food allergies. So let me talk a bit about our goals for today. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about anxiety per se. So what anxiety is, how it impacts us physiologically, in our thoughts, in our emotions, and then developmentally, how anxiety affects children and teenagers, because things are different on the developmental spectrum, and it's important to understand how anxiety can manifest itself at different ages. And then we're going to move on to some skills and tools so you can apply that understanding in the real world to hopefully be preventative, reducing food allergic children's anxieties, but also managing your own anxiety, because the parent's anxiety directly translates often into children's anxiety, because they look to us not only to understand what's physically safe, but also to understand what's emotionally safe. So let me talk a little bit about the fear response. I love this little icon that I found, and what this symbol is supposed to represent is that you're supposed to run as fast as you can away from whatever this dangerous thing is that they have slapped this label on. And sometimes fear is a very appropriate response, and sometimes running away as fast as you can is exactly what you need to do. So fear is an appropriate response to a real danger. Most people are familiar with the fight or flight response. These are things that mobilize us to protect us from danger. The thing that's a little less familiar is the freeze response. The freeze response is another aspect of the adrenaline response or the fear response. And if you can picture a deer or a rabbit who's in that frozen state, they're very, very still. But what they're doing is actually scanning their environment. So they look very passive, but there's an enormous amount of arousal going on. They're scanning with their eyes, they're listening with their ears, they're feeling with their feet for vibrations in the environment. They're trying to determine when it is safe to do something, safe to run, and get away from danger. And especially in young children, that is not an uncommon reaction. And when you think about your child, you might notice that there are some times where they actually seem to be frozen and a little bit paralyzed because of fear. The fear response encompasses our thoughts, images that may pop into our minds, whether those are little snapshots or little movies that play, physical sensations, as well as, of course, the emotions and feelings. The primary cause of this experience that we have when we feel fearful is adrenaline. Adrenaline is a naturally occurring hormone in the body that's released instantaneously, really in a nanosecond of your brain interpreting that there's a threat in the environment. Adrenaline is released into your bloodstream. That results in increased heart rate, more rapid breathing, a sense of tunnel vision, and what that tunnel vision does is it forces us to focus on the perceived threat. If you've ever been in a close call in the car, so nothing bad has happened, but for a moment you were anticipating that there might be an accident, we're all pretty familiar with what goes on in our bodies when that happens. So the danger might pass almost instantaneously, but once that adrenaline is present, the rapid heart rate, the sweaty palms, the sense perhaps of tingling or chills, flushed face, and even that emotional sense of fear continues. So you might be driving along thinking to yourself, well, everything's fine, the fear is past, why am I feeling this way? But what you're experiencing is those after effects of the adrenaline. And until that adrenaline is metabolized out of your system, you're going to be feeling some of its after effects. So when your child is experiencing that, you may have established safety, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but that adrenaline is still in their bodies for quite some time, and so the efforts we need to impose to manage and help them with that anxiety takes place over a period of time. If you can think about, again, can we go back to that previous slide, please? If you can think about that state of being in that adrenaline state, you can also think about how difficult it is to really think through, problem solve, and be rational at those times. We're just too overwhelmed with emotion in those moments, and that's why understanding this state is so important, because talking your child through something when they're already in that place is going to be pretty challenging. Okay, next slide, please. Often what people are experiencing along with those adrenaline responses is a more chronic state of worry. So adrenaline is a whole body experience. Worry tends to be more thought oriented. It's a cognitive activity. We're anticipating a future event. We're thinking about something that hasn't happened yet, and we're perceiving that future event as a threat. What's important to understand is the thought process and the visualization, so again, playing that movie in your head, can trigger the same adrenaline response as an actual event in the external environment. So you can get yourself into that adrenalized state just by thinking about something that's worrisome to you. Interesting about people who tend to be worriers is they also tend to be individuals with good abstract thinking, a lot of imagination, and good visualization skills. So there are great assets that go along with being a worrier. When those skills get targeted towards anticipated threats, that's when you get a state of chronic worry. So some of this is about understanding who your child is. Do they have these features? Do they tend to be worriers, not just about their food allergies, but other things as well? And that's going to give you some hints as to how you can help them capitalize on those assets and minimize the worry. So again, bright, inquisitive children tend to report more worries. These are kids who want to know about the world. These are kids who have questions sort of about everything. They might often want to know what's coming next. They're kids who like predictability and control. So again, knowing these things about your child, that it may not just be about food allergies. They may have worries about tests. They may have worries about friendships. They may have worries about change. And any of the strategies and techniques I'm going to talk to you about today are going to be applicable to anything that is on your child's mind, not just their food allergies. So the underlying belief system that goes with being a worrier is that the event that you're thinking about is a threat. And that leads to this sense of fear, anxiety, and paralysis. If we can help shift that mindset so that we're still looking at the same event, but instead of viewing it as a threat, we view it as a challenge. It's a problem to be solved. And what our goal is to convert that anxiety and paralysis into mobilization. So if it's a problem to be solved, what are the steps I need to take in order to solve it? And how can I put that in place? And that starts to replace that internal cognitive worry that's just going around and around in circles but not really solving the problem. Okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, when we're in that state of anxiety, either in a worry mode or in an adrenalized state, rational thinking, problem solving are much more difficult. What tends to happen most often is we go into a state of avoidance. I don't want to go there. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to do that. Introducing anxiety or increasing anxiety tends to be a very poor motivator, especially for children. So there's so much danger message and worry message that comes in a food allergic child's life. And what our goal often is to get them to do the things that they need to do to stay safe. Unfortunately, the higher their anxiety is, the harder it is for them to think rationally, and the lower their motivation is. As I mentioned, they just tend to become paralyzed. Anxiety about one thing also tends to flow over into anxiety about other things. So a child who tends to be anxious might be worrying about an upcoming test or a field hockey tournament or a gymnastics meet, and that's where their initial anxiety is coming from. But if then they're presented with a food situation that makes them a little bit uncomfortable, if they're already in an anxious state, it's entirely possible that they're going to be much more anxious about their food than they would have been otherwise. In addition, anxiety tends to generalize. So if I'm feeling fearful about eating a bagel from a bagel store, well, that might now convert into anxiety about eating other similar foods or eating from other similar places. And that might generalize then into eating all types of bread. And that might generalize into something else that's similar but not identical and certainly is far away from the original danger thing. It's a very common phenomenon for anxiety sort of grow on its own if it's not being regularly tackled. And of course, if it's hard to think rationally, it's hard to think away anxiety. So just talking yourself out of anxiety internally in your own mind or just talking through anxiety with a child tends to be a not very effective strategy. So that's why we're going to talk about a variety of different tools and strategies to address anxiety. Next slide, please. So again, we touched a couple of times on this idea of paralysis. And also paralysis can be not just of action, just being stuck in one place, but sometimes our thoughts get paralyzed. It is literally hard to think. And I'm going to bring you back to that experience in the car. And if you thought to yourself, well, would I really be able to think through something logically and clearly when I was in that state? The answer is probably no. People with performance anxiety have this experience. You know, they get up on stage, whether it is to perform a piece of music, to perform in a play, to do public speaking, and the anxiety simply gets in the way of them executing the skills that they've rehearsed and practiced over and over again. You know, a lot of things just really shut down inside. The kind of actions that anxiety does tend to promote typically are those whose primary purpose is to reduce the level of anxiety, even though that anxiety is not necessarily based on a real threat. So this is when we get into behaviors like checking repeatedly. So, you know, well, I know I've got the EpiPen in my purse, or I know my child has it in his or her backpack, but I'm just going to look one more time. Or I spoke to the nurse already, but I really am going to call her again. I read the ingredient label. Let me do it one more time. I know this meal is safe, but I'm just not going to serve it because it's making me too anxious. In all of these cases, safety has been established, but the action that's being taken of repeatedly doing the same thing over or being avoidant are really geared towards making us feel better. They don't actually make us safer. So that's an important distinction, starting to think about what are my behaviors geared towards. Are they actually increasing safety, or are they primarily making me feel better? Next slide, please. Thanks. So rumination and worry are this act of mental repetition, again with no actual goal orientation. So I'm going over and over and over in my mind. Is it safe? Are you sure? What if, what if, what if? And kids very, very commonly, because especially young children are not very powerful, they're not the ones who are taking the actions in their environment to make things safer. What they have available to them is their own thoughts. So they can go over and over and over things. So the belief starts to be formed that my worry plus my avoidance makes me safer. And again, what we're striving for is changing that to, well, my preparation, my knowledge, the support I have, and the tools I have, that's what's keeping me safe. My worry isn't actually making me any safer. My avoidance, and I want to be really clear when I'm talking about avoidance here, I'm not talking about avoiding the reducing avoidance to the foods that we're allergic to. I'm talking about behavioral avoidance of things that we know are safe. So just to be clear, when I'm talking about avoidance in this particular talk, that's what I'm referring to. So focusing on, well, am I prepared? Do I have the knowledge that I need? Do I have support around me? And do I have the tools and strategies in place to create safety? And that becomes our checklist, as opposed to the sort of repetitive what-ifs that don't have an answer. So if I don't feel prepared, well, what do I need to do to get prepared? If I'm lacking knowledge, if you feel it, you know, and I want to emphasize this, if there's any piece of understanding or information that you don't feel you have thoroughly and comfortably in mind, then that's a cue for you to return to your pediatrician, to your allergist, to reliable sources like kids with food allergies, to get the information that you need so you feel very, very secure in your knowledge about where the line of safety is for your child with their food allergies. That's what then allows you to move forward and create that safety plan. along with the rumination and the worry, one thing that it's important to understand about anxiety is that it can be intrusive. So this comes up when your child might be having a play date, be out on the softball field or the baseball field, come back from a swim meet, and everything's gone well, and they seem to have had a great time, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they report to you, I'm worried about dinner tomorrow, or what am I going to do at the birthday party at school next week, or I am afraid that the EpiPens aren't good enough, and can you check them one more time for me? And you're sitting there thinking, where did this come from? My child was having a good time, and it's totally unrelated to food or allergies, and that is the nature of anxiety. It tends to intrude. And as the level of overall baseline anxiety goes up, the likelihood of this intrusive quality becomes more great. So when you're noticing that anxiety is intruding in your child's life, that's a cue to you not just to address it in the moment by helping them through that initial worry or anxiety, but that perhaps a general plan of managing their anxiety more effectively is called for. The other thing I would say is that if you've really done a good job of establishing safety, and that's very clear, and you've made it clear to your child, and the anxiety persists well beyond establishing safety, that's another red flag for you that doing something on a regular basis to address your child's anxiety and reduce it is probably important. So we're going to talk a little bit about temperament. Just to be clear, and if you have 2 food allergic children in your household, they may have 2 different reactions to what it's like to go through life with a food allergy. Your child and their best friend may have very different reactions. My daughter, by complete coincidence, ended up with 4 kids with food allergies in her Girl Scout troop, and they are 4 very different children, and they have 4 very different reactions to walking through life with their food allergies. And that's, none of them are pathological or normal. They are all normal. They are just different. Because of genetics, wiring, previous learning experiences, some people are more prone to anxiety and maybe a little bit more fearful by nature. But it's also really good to know that that's linked with some wonderful traits. Kids who tend to be a little bit more anxious also tend to be generally sensitive. That makes them expressive, compassionate, very concerned about the feelings of others, very aware of what others may need. Some kids may also be a little bit shy, so they may feel a little overwhelmed by a lot of social interaction, but that's not always true at all. There are plenty of kids who have some anxiety but are also very outgoing and really enjoy social interaction. The good news here is that anxious kids tend to not be big risk takers, so they respond very well to gentle discipline, to reminders. These are not the kids who tend to get themselves into a lot of hot water by not thinking through. They are overthinking, and so we're actually looking to sort of dial back their thought process if we can. Next slide, please. So these kids, again, are motivated by a desire to avoid unpleasant experiences, including these unpleasant emotions, and they're very concerned about fulfilling the standards that you set for them. So as we're going to get to making a plan, making it very clear what the safety plan is, these are kids who are likely to follow that plan, and sometimes their lack of ability to follow it is more about lack of understanding than a lack of desire to meet the standards that are set for them. Okay, so now we're going to start talking a little bit about how to manage and address anxiety. I'm going to talk developmentally, but I'm going to start with more general ideas about managing anxiety really across the age spectrum. First of all, separating what is anxiety from what is the actual need to manage the food allergy is very important. So acknowledging that this is a problem that my family has to live with on a day-to-day basis, and that's a challenge. I don't want to minimize how difficult it can be or how much work it takes, how much emotional energy. But acknowledging that problem and meeting that challenge is not the same as living in a state of fear. And so if I have any goal, it's to really help people tease that apart so they can feel less fearful but still be doing everything they need to do to stay safe. As I mentioned before, the more facts you have about your allergy, the more well-equipped you are to manage it, and the more facts you have about anxiety, the more well-equipped you are to manage it. So just participating in this webinar today is a fantastic first step. A feeling of anxiety is incredibly unpleasant. It can be awful. But the state of anxiety, that racing heart, sweaty palms, that can't hurt you. That in and of itself, we can learn to tolerate, to manage, and to reduce. So sometimes that avoidance is really geared towards making that really, really horrible feeling go away, when actually the avoidance is going to now reinforce, oh, when I feel anxious, what I do is not eat. When I feel anxious, what I do is not go to school. When I feel anxious, what I do is not play baseball with my friends. And we want to separate those two things. When I feel anxious, I do a bunch of things to make my anxiety go down, and then I go to school, and then I go play ball, and then I go eat lunch. So we separate the things I can do to be safe with my food allergies from the things I can do to feel less anxious about my food allergies. So we're going to talk a little bit about the back to school season. Probably this will come as no surprise to all of you listening. This is a time of year which can trigger a host of anxiety. The leisurely summer is kind of coming to a close. If you're listening to me from the southern U.S., you may already be back to school. Here in the East, we have about 4 to 5 weeks left. So the back-to-school season always is about novelty. Even if your child is just changing grades, they're getting a new teacher, they're getting some new classmates. If they're changing school buildings, and in my district we change school buildings about every 2 years, so there's a lot of change going on. In human beings, anything novel can be experienced as a threat. New things are challenging. They take a lot of emotional energy. New people, processes, places. Perhaps your child is now getting to the age where they're going to go on field trips. They're participating on a sports team for the first time. Maybe there's some travel involved. These are all challenging events that can be experienced as threat, but as we mentioned earlier, keeping them as a challenge, as a problem that can be solved, is one of our key elements. And of course, this season ushers in the food-centered holidays. There may be parties at school, there may be parties at home, starting with the Jewish holidays perhaps, and then moving on towards Halloween, of course, and then going into Thanksgiving and the winter holidays. So all of that brings with it a host of potential anxieties and worries for kids. So my message to you is, whether you've just started school or you've got a few weeks left, this is the time for prevention. Another way we can get involved in avoidance is taking a stance of, you know what, I'm just not going to bring it up. I'm just not going to think about it. Why light a fire under this? And I would certainly say, if your child is not voicing any concerns whatsoever, I would wait for them to come to you if they have any worries or any ideas that you need to address. But if your child is voicing and articulating some concerns about the upcoming school year, meet them where they are. Find out what their concerns are and start with some coping strategies. You don't have to go, gangbusters, but if they're already anticipating, and I think, my daughter's starting high school, so she's got a whole new world ahead of her, and she's already with her friends talking about, oh, what's it going to be like, and what are older siblings experiencing. They're starting to process it. And very often kids are processing stuff way before we as parents think that they are. So it's something you want to listen to and view this as your opportunity for prevention. One of the strategies that's so important, because we talked about novelty, is making that new stuff as familiar as possible. If it's possible for you to tour your school with your child, meet teachers, administrators, nurses, put faces to names, and being specific, if you can, about here's the team of people who keep you safe at school. And I would be generous about that. If you can include the principal in that, especially for young children who really like the idea often that there's sort of an important central figure that has some power who's involved in this. If that's not accessible to you, if your school's not open or they don't permit tours, going on your school's website, even driving around the exterior, looking at the school, doing a dry run of here's where the bus route will be, or here's how I'm going to drive you, or here's how you're going to walk. Even if this has been done before, if it's a new year, it might be worth doing again. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because I'm going to emphasize, especially with young kids, but really with everybody, role playing. Whether you do that with dolls, with stuffed animals, with your pets, or just with you and your child, or encourage your child to do this with their friends, role-playing some of the new experiences they're going to be confronting can be incredibly valuable. So what's it going to be like to meet the new kids in your classroom? What would it be like to tell someone new about your food allergies? Maybe you've moved. Maybe this is a whole new relocation and your child's going to be the new kid in school. Walking through that with words and really exploring, what if this happens? What if that happens? All of that just gives the opportunity for this novelty issue to wear off, and now you don't have that additional anxiety confronting you. Talking about food options is, again, as soon as your child brings up this issue, you have the opportunity to say, I'm going to call Aunt Linda and we're going to go over the menu. Do you want to know what we're bringing for you this year? Do you want to have input into that? Do you want to role play a Thanksgiving dinner with me, with your dolls and with your toy kitchen? All of which just makes it more normalized that this is something that we can talk about. So once again, remembering this behavioral avoidance is not your friend. You want to get involved with the issue so you can work it through with your child. One of the good things to report about anxiety is it's incredibly treatable. The interventions to reduce anxiety are very effective. They range from the behavioral, the physical, the psychological, meaning sort of cognitive or thought-related, as well as medical in terms of medication, all of which individually and in combination can be extraordinarily powerful in reducing anxiety. So as I mentioned, we want to seek to end avoidance of things that are safe, so we want to bring kids closer and closer in small steps to the thing that they're feeling afraid of. And then I'm going to talk about some different strategies that you can implement on a daily basis to bring overall level of anxiety down. At the end of the talk, I'm going to highlight some of the items that are in the handouts that you can download and are going to be available to you after the webinar is done. There are some specifics about books that you can refer to, websites that are going to describe some of these exercises in detail. So I'm just going to go over them very briefly, but there's some great resources out there. I strongly encourage you to look through them, find the ones that you find appealing, that your child is interested in, especially when it comes to the breathing or meditation and imagery and things like that. So daily breathing or relaxation exercises. One of the ways in to change that adrenaline response is through breath. We tend to breathe more rapidly and shallowly when we're anxious. So by deliberately slowing down the pace of breath and bringing into a slow, deep in the abdomen breathing, we can literally undo the effects of that adrenaline. We can slow the heart rate. We can reduce the sense of feeling keyed up and anxious. And that can be done almost invisibly. One of the great things about breathing relaxation is that you can do it anywhere, at the bus stop, at the cafeteria table, while you're waiting in the wings for your ballet recital. There's really, it's almost undetectable. So teaching your child some breathing techniques can be a great and valuable tool. You know, perhaps you arrive early for a class and you're stuck in the car, so that's a great time to do some breathing and relaxation. What that might look like very briefly might be breathing in very slowly to a count of 4, holding that breath gently for a count of 2, and then exhaling that breath to a count of 4. And doing that, inhale, hold, exhale for about 5 breaths. And again, the handouts are going to give you a variety of different options of similar breathing techniques. Similarly with imagery, helping your child have a safe place in their imagination, a relaxing place in their imagination that they can go to when they're feeling stressed and anxious to do some visualizing. It can also work beautifully to visualize a time of great success and competence. So remembering back to winning the basketball game, remembering back to the first time you baked a cake on your own. It can be really anything. Remembering how great you are with your pets and the time you gave the dog a bath. None of those are unreasonable ways to help your child connect to their strengths, their sense of calm. And so those are great exercises also that can be done almost anywhere, pretty much invisibly. Daily self-monitoring. By self-monitoring, what I mean is making a map of your child's anxiety with them, keeping a journal, and really assessing, if your child comes home from school, for example, and says, I had a horrible day, it was terrible, I was anxious, I hate it, I'm not going back. That might be an opportunity to pause and say, gee, that's really interesting. Tell me more about your day. What what went on in the first hour, what went on in the second hour. And what you might discover was actually they were anxious right before lunch and while they were sitting there, but really the first half of the day and right before they came home they felt pretty good. Maybe they had a lot of fun in gym class. And monitoring that and looking at that every day gives you a way to show to your child, gee, your anxiety is a problem and you're worrying, but only for a little while every day. And actually a lot of that day you're having some really, really good time. So let's focus on that a little bit. Daily practice is key. Consistency is much more important than intensity. So if you do any of these things 5 minutes a day with your child, that's much more helpful and useful to them than an hour once a week. So finding and carving out a little bit of time to do some anxiety management strategies each day will benefit you both, I promise you. I also want to emphasize, as you can see in these suggestions, these are all things to do. There's a little bit of talking involved in exploring and investigating, but role-playing, touring, doing breathing, doing the imagination exercises, those are really active. And the next thing on the next slide is also very active. I'm going to talk about exercise. You got that adrenaline in your body, you want to burn it off. Vigorous exercise is incredibly helpful. Lots of research has indicated exercise is great for us in a million ways, but one of the ways it's incredibly valuable is reducing symptoms of anxiety. And that can be anything. It can be a vigorous sport if your child is interested in that. It can be dance class. It can be taking a walk with the dog. It can be going for a hike. It can be running around in circles in the yard. It doesn't have to be anything special. It just has to be something your child enjoys and they feel good about and gets their heart rate up. Because the other thing that's important to recognize is that little kids especially are unfamiliar with what it feels like to be anxious in the body, and exercise gives you some of those same sensations. So they can come to associate that sensation with something positive instead of something negative. Any activities your child can be involved in that gives them a sense of confidence or control, again, that can be they raised a pig for 4-H. That can be that they tell a story to their little sibling. That can be that they, are a star on the basketball team. It doesn't matter what it is. It matters that they enjoy it and they feel good at it. The next may be a little counterintuitive. I'm going to encourage you to give your child permission to express a variety of other emotions. Because if you can think of emotions as energy, if you've got a lot of intense negative emotional energy in your body, that might be related to anger. It might be related to sadness. It might be related to jealousy. But if those emotions aren't able to be expressed, that same energy can be kind of shunted off and manifest itself as anxiety. So whether the anger, the sorrow, the other negative things are related to their food allergies, they might be angry that they can't go with the other kids to the ice cream parlor. They might be jealous of their sibling who can eat something that they can't eat, or it might be completely unrelated. It doesn't matter. Giving them an opportunity to express themselves in any way is very valuable. And then finally, we'll talk about some indications of when to get professional help or seek medication. That is always an option as well. So let's talk developmentally a little bit. So how are we going to approach kids at the different ages? With preschoolers, you really want to focus on basic knowledge and facts. You want to be clear and concrete, similar to teaching about anything else around safety. You're allowed to go in the kiddie pool. You're not allowed to go in the deep pool. That's a rule. You're not allowed to be out of my sight. That's a rule. Very clear, very direct, very simple. And with a lot of reward and punishment, you're going to teach them the behavior that you desire to see. With little kids, again, play is a great way to do this. So setting a table with their toys and talking about like, oh, what if so-and-so offers you a cookie? How are you going to say no politely to that? Let's go through that. Little kids often also love it when you role reverse with them. So you be the kid. Let them be the adult. Or you be the new kid. Let them be the one who's been in school already. Let them show you what to do. Sometimes that is the greatest teacher of all. So again, with preschoolers, just because it's serious doesn't mean you shouldn't play with it. Little kids learn everything through play, literally everything. Your young toddlers and preschoolers, this is your opportunity to sit on the carpet with them, get out their favorite Legos, dolls, stuffed animals, paper dolls, whatever you may have in your house, and walk through some of these things. They're not going to experience it as scary. they're going to experience as normal. And the more you normalize it, the more comfortable they're going to be with it. What you want to avoid is fear messages, because as we mentioned before, the more anxiety there is, the less learning there is. And what you're striving to do is teach them tools to be safe. So what you want to say are things like, that you don't do this because it's not safe. You could get hurt, you could get a boo-boo, you could get really, really sick. Well, it's so bad that you might need to go to the doctor or the hospital to get you better. It might take a while to get better, and then you'd miss so-and-so's birthday party or the movie night that we're going to, or what have you. You want to give them motivation and make them understand that it's serious without being frightening. So you don't want to say a lot of scary words like death and dying. Next slide, please. You want to avoid focusing on the most dire consequences. And you also want to avoid focusing on your own anxiety, because that will automatically ratchet up your child's anxiety. Telling them, don't do this, I'm afraid you'll die, don't scare me. I understand where those ideas are coming from, but they're not going to really benefit your child, and that's what you're looking for. Moving on to slightly older children, like kindergarten through third grade or so, and developmentally, grade for grade or year for year, kids are different, so you're going to pick and choose the strategies that seem to apply to your child. You want to continue all the previous suggestions, but kids at this age are starting a little bit more to search for whys. In my school district, they started learning about basic biology and digestion in third and fourth grade. So these are great opportunities to slightly increase the amount of factual information that you give to kids about what food allergies are and the different types, what happens when they go to the allergist. Answer the questions that come up as they arise. And you can talk more here about what happens in the body when you have an allergy, why it makes them sick, why antihistamines do what they do, why EpiPens do what they do, why we need to have these medicines with us all the time. That can sometimes be empowering for kids, and they have a better understanding of what's going on inside themselves that's not so mysterious. You want to emphasize, of course, the ability of medicine to help, and you want to emphasize that there are a lot of things we do. So it's possible, especially with kids in this age group, that what you do to keep them safe is still behind the scenes for them a little bit. So this is an opportunity to bring that out into the forefront. Like, well, I do a lot of things. Before you go to school, I talk to the nurse at school, and I talk to your teacher. Here's the plan, and I follow the plan. That may be more than enough for your child. Your child may not want to know another thing, or your child may have 50 questions for you. So you're giving them a little bit of information, pulling back, waiting to see if they have questions, giving a little more information, pulling back, waiting to see if they have questions. Similarly, with the younger kids, you don't want to emphasize the direness of the situation or its consequences. Again, your goal is to mobilize their safe behavior. Too much threat message, again, gets into that paralysis. So older kids, as you get into older elementary, lower middle school, things like that, even though kids are more independent and they are developing a lot of strengths in these years, they can become more anxious because their comprehension of what's going on increases. And whether you have shared with them or not the potential life-threatening nature of food allergies, your child may have come upon that information on their own. Their independence may both empower and scare them. But either way, they're going to continue to look to you for information on whether or not they should be frightened. If the message that you give them is, this is terrifying, that's how they are likely to feel. If the message that you give them is, yeah, this is challenging, but we're on top of it. And here's how we address it. Here's my responsibility. Here's your responsibility. That can be a lot more stabilizing and comforting for them. Older kids can, again, based on your child's sort of level of independence, they may be able to cope more on their own. Perhaps you can be there, but they can start the conversation with the nurse. They can learn some techniques and strategies to do at lunchtime if they're feeling anxious at that time. So you can give them information and teach them coping strategies. They're starting to come into an age where they can utilize those things themselves or come to you when they need more. So for example, you explain, first I call the nurse, then I meet with her and your teachers, and then I talk to the lunchroom staff. That's my job. You can then follow that up with, and here's your job. Your role is to sit at the nut-free table. So next slide, please. And if you're doing your job and I'm doing my job and all the people on our team all work together, we keep you safe at school. That's how it goes. If you're feeling worried or stressed, even though everybody in the team is doing what they're supposed to, then we'll make a plan for addressing the worry and the anxiety. All right, let's talk a little bit about teenagers, and I'm talking about, 13, 14 on up, so not just the older teens who we tend to focus on, but actually there's a lot of research to indicate that it's the middle school years that are the most challenging for kids emotionally. Things tend to stabilize a bit as they get older. So as again, if you have children in this age group, I don't have to tell you, the emphasis on conformity is really, really powerful, as well as kids' capacity for abstract thinking. So they're even more able to project into the future. Believe it or not, kids at this age are developing their empathy and compassion. They may not have very much empathy and compassion for you, but I promise you they're having empathy and compassion for their friends. They're having empathy and compassion sometimes for the earth or for animals, and that's growing in them. However, this sense of comparing myself with others, feeling what others feel, and noticing where I fit in can trigger a lot of why me kind of feelings at this age. In some kids, you may see an increase in that sense of impulsiveness and invulnerability. So even with anxious kids, there may be both. So you might need to pull out the big guns of mortality and really being serious in your discussion about the risks of food allergies. However, research has also indicated that fear is less influential for teens. All of those videos of car accidents and lungs blackened by cigarette smoke aren't as effective in changing teen behavior as appealing to their need to be cool and fit in. So if your child is feeling uncomfortable and awkward about carrying an EpiPen or about having to sit at a different table or asking people to wash their hands, it is really, really important to address strategies for managing that so they still feel that they're one of the group. Whether that means getting them a nicer bag to carry their EpiPens in or cargo pants so it's not so obvious, or having a conversation maybe with their best friend, encouraging them to talk more openly about what they need with a trusted friend. That can make a huge difference and maybe much, much more impactful than focusing on what's scary about food allergies. So you also want to continue to foster independence with stepping in to create safety when you need to do that. So really checking in with your kids on an ongoing way. What are they confident and competent in doing on their own? Can they be the one who talks to the waiter in the restaurant? Can they be the one who talks to the guy at the pizzeria? Can they be the one who checks labels first and then comes to you for a double check? Really looking at what are their other levels of independence and when are you ready, like with driver's ed, when are you really ready to get out of the car with the 2 steering wheels and give them the wheel on their own? It's a very similar kind of a thing. And lastly, I want to emphasize that with teenagers, communication needs to happen when they are open. They are rarely interested in talking to us on our time schedule. Very often the moment that we're free and ready and able to talk about something serious, it is the last thing on their minds, and they experience us as intrusive. On the other hand, they may come to you when you're half asleep and ready to kind of conk out, or you have an important piece of work that you're onto, or you're in the middle of dinner and your hands are full of raw chicken or something like that. But that's the moment that they've chosen to seek you out and really have a heart-to-heart. And if it is at all possible for you to set aside what you are working on and capitalize on that window of opportunity, I strongly encourage you to do so, because those windows close really fast, and sometimes they don't open again for a while. All right, moving on. When kids bring you really difficult questions, my number one advice is to pause before you answer and to inquire more about what your child is thinking. So my brain is telling me I'm allergic to everything. I can't go out. I can't eat anything. Initial impulse might be, oh, don't be silly. Of course you're safe, and I'm here, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe. Reassure, and try to calm them down. But we don't really know enough, perhaps, at that moment to give an effective message. So the first response might be, wow, I really want to understand that. Tell me more about what you're thinking. Well, I'm so sorry you're feeling so worried, and your brain is telling you that. What else is your brain telling you? Now, you might discover that this was triggered by a particular event, and you have to address the event that started the anxiety rolling. You might discover that actually they started out worrying about something totally unrelated. But even that pause, that inquiry, that engaging with your child is so nurturing and validating that just that action can bring down their anxiety a little bit. You want to validate their concerns, tell them that it's really good and important that they're curious, support their right to seek answers. Well, of course I want to know more about, why are you allergic to this new food that you weren't allergic to in the past? Well, let's ask your doctor about that the next time we go. You're right, it is unfair. And especially with younger kids, the other point of the inquiry is to answer just what they're asking, and like I said before, wait and assess. Do they need more? Do they need more information? Or are we good for now? Even if they come back to you the next day, you're only giving them as much as they are comfortable with in that moment. Finally, let me talk about when to seek professional help. So you want to ask some questions about how much the anxiety and worry is associated, and the associated behaviors are interfering with your life or your child's life. So if your child has pulled back from activities that are safe, that they enjoy, if they are not experiencing pleasure, even if they're engaging in those liked and enjoyed activities, you're not seeing smiles, you're not seeing laughter, you're seeing a worried face all the time, a child who wakes up in the morning and is instantly worried, a child who can't sleep at night on an ongoing basis. Some insomnia and bad dreams are very normal, but if it's really chronic, that would concern me. If they start avoiding really necessary things, if there's a lot of school refusal, refusing self-care, I know of kids who didn't trust toothpaste, so they wouldn't brush their teeth, who didn't trust the water coming out of their shower. As I said, fear can generalize into very irrational places, and fear can become part of previously very, very safe and accepted activities. So when you start to see that broadening and things are now taking on a new scope, that would be a flag to perhaps seek some professional help. It's important to understand that kids can be really distracted by their anxiety. I've worked with kids who looked like they had ADHD, but only had anxiety. And what was going on was that they would sit in the classroom and they'd be so preoccupied with their worry and the rumination and anticipating the next thing that was coming up that they couldn't focus on a math lesson. They couldn't write an essay. They couldn't do the task at hand. And so really assessing for anxiety when the teachers are saying, like, what's going on, here she is not focused, here she is distracted, here she is all over the place. If there are other indications of anxiety, that's an important question to pursue. So symptoms of depression, self-blame, self-hatred, focusing on this is a punishment, I've done something bad, feeling hopeless about the future, or particularly if there's been a traumatic event, and that might be a life-threatening event like an anaphylaxis or a medical procedure, but really what matters is that it was traumatic to the child, not that the average man on the street would consider it a trauma. So I worked with a child who was traumatized by walking into their classroom and discovering that their teacher had hosted a luncheon for the other teachers, and there was food all over the tables. And so this classroom had been a safe place, and now it wasn't a safe place anymore. And that was overwhelming. They really, really suffered as a result of that. And if that continues to replay itself in your child's mind, or if you see repetitive like reenactments of that in your young child's play over and over and over again, it's not resolving, that would be another cue to seek some professional help. So I do have some handouts for you with books, workbooks that you can do with your children, websites, and some reputable websites that can direct you to a therapist in your local area. I've also included in the handouts, because I just didn't have time to include it today, some closing thoughts for parents that really have to do with our own experiences, our experiences of loss, of frustration, of sadness when we are, walking this walk. You'll be able to download this or get it off of the blog post in a few days. In conclusion, this is a quote from one of the books I recommend. Fears are appropriate concerns about dangers that are external to your child. The external danger might be a cliff at the Grand Canyon. Normally, a child or parent may be fearful of the cliff, but will continue walking along the trail, knowing that if he doesn't go off the trail, he won't be in danger. Although danger is only a few inches from the path, the path is safe. And children with food allergies often exist under conditions in which danger is only a few inches away. However, if you help create and teach them to walk on their safe path, they can be safe. None of us chose to live our lives on this particular Grand Canyon, but that is where life has placed us, and we can learn to walk without fear. And my hope is that by listening to this conversation today, that this was in some way helpful to all of you out there with regard to these fears. I know we have some questions that were posted, or I can take questions from the live audience at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenblum. Wonderful presentation. I really, really appreciate how thorough you were and how much you covered for all of us. And, you know, the one thing that kept going through my mind was my son's 25 years old, and when he comes home and he's independent, living on his own, the first thing I'll do if he tries to leave the house is say, do you have your epinephrine with you? And that's for me. He knows to carry it, but I need to know that before he leaves. So I totally get some of the things that you brought up. So thank you again. We're going to go ahead and switch to the giveaways. I don't know if you're available past 2 o'clock because I know you have a busy schedule. It's 1:58 right now. If you are not available, then maybe what we can do with some of these questions that have been submitted, we can get back to you, and perhaps we can work with you to do a blog post regarding the answers to them. Instead, I'll let you decide what you want to do.
No, that's fine. I could go till 10 after, if that's helpful.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
that's helpful. Okay, thank you. So our Watch and Win giveaways, we have 2 winners of Sun Butter, and these are valued $20 each for Tracy Steffies and Susan Brusk. And then the Dr. Lucy giveaway is for Rebecca Sager and Marie Abbott. We'll be in touch with you to verify your contact information so that we can get that off to you. And then before we leave, we also want to talk about an important message about being prepared for anaphylaxis. We have a really good handout regarding that. It's also in your handouts. I should tell you, on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, if you're on desktop, you will see a little tab that now says Handouts, and there's 3 of them, including some of the ones that Dr. Gia pointed out. And one of them is the anaphylaxis. Our next webinar is Back to School with Nutritious Lunch Boxes, and this is going to be fun information, beautiful pictures, and we're going to have Deb Ingerado, dietitian and nutritionist. You've probably heard her before if you've attended other nutrition webinars, and Keely McGuire from the Allergy Friendly, who will do allergy friendly lunch boxes. She's the Keely McGuire blog, and she really does some beautiful photography. Also, if you're in the Philadelphia area, I invite you to attend our 7th Mall Walk-In Expo, the Strides for Safe Kids event. It's at Plymouth Meeting Mall on September 12th. It's a Saturday, and it's in the morning. And then we also have back-to-school activities beginning on our community, and you're welcome to share your children's photo for my first day of school. We always have fun seeing the kids and their new clothes and backpacks heading off to school, and so if you want to share yours, we'd love to have you do that. State Honor Roll. For those of you sending children off to school, today is the release of the 2015 State Honor Roll Report for Asthma and Allergy Policies for Schools. You can read all about it, the press release, the findings of the top 10 most allergy and asthma friendly states in the country by going to statehonorroll.org. And lastly, thank you. Kids with Food Allergies is a division of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. If you found this webinar helpful, please keep us in your annual giving plans. We really do appreciate your support. So